Hello, friends. Bo Prosser here. Bo in the Beard, Center for Christian Education, C4CE.org. Welcome to another uh, episode in our ongoing uh, generosity and stewardship videos. Today, we're looking at capital campaigns, and I am joined, as always, by Ruben Swint, the generosity guy. Ruben, welcome.
Hello, hello.
Thanks always for joining in with me. This is great. Our viewers love seeing us sing and dance for them. So we're going to jump into capital campaigns today and see what we can learn from one another about this and what we might can do to help our churches as they engage in what capital campaigns might look like for them. Some of our viewers have probably been through a capital campaign. I know that some of our viewers are thinking about a capital campaign, and clergy certainly understand some of the basics of a capital campaign. But today I'm hoping that we can educate and inspire a bit and perhaps help our churches as they think about what needs to happen next and how things can happen for them. So let's jump into this. Ruben, what is a capital campaign?
Bo, glad to be with you and happy for this topic. I've spent decades involved in leading churches in capital campaigns. And what the campaign is a major fundraising effort to raise large gifts and meaningful and significant pledges that are paid over 3 years, and to do that within a short period of time. So, when we have capital campaign, we're dancing with big money. We are looking for large gifts that will provide a nice foundation for paying the cost of the project. But we're also looking for significant pledges that are over and above families and individuals' normal giving. And this generally comes in over a 3 year giving period. So that's what a capital campaign is. It's really getting serious about raising the giving level, and all of that money is targeted for your identified and approved project.
Okay. So why wouldn't I just go to the bank and borrow the money?
Well, you could do that. That's certainly an option. Another option is to sell bonds. But both of those options are loans, which require repayment. And does your normal operating ministry budget have in it the space to put a debt service amount? Most churches cannot automatically add servicing debt to their operating ministry budget. So, what a loan does is it ties you up. It restricts funding for expansion and for missions involvement. And that's how capital campaigns came into church life. Uh, First of all, banks didn't have a whole lot of experience lending to churches, and they were reluctant to lend or to lend very much. And churches couldn't borrow everything they needed. Now, that's not the case nowadays. But secondly, and probably most importantly, taking on debt restricted the church's ability to maintain or expand its ministry and to stay connected in a meaningful way to supporting worldwide missions. So, capital campaigns are a way of protecting ministry and missions while providing for the additional space you need to carry out ministry in your community.
So, capital campaign then is basically the most productive and the least expensive method for raising money. That's
Yes,
basically what you're telling me. So if we want to
yes.
be good stewards of the generosity of our membership, we don't want to tie up part of that money paying off a loan at an interest rate that may be higher than we would want to borrow against. And when a member is giving me the money, there's no interest in
Correct.
that, correct?
That is
So,
right.
so we're going to the membership and we're asking them to help us do usually one of three things. We're going to pay off our debt. We're going to demolish or renovate existing space, or
Yep.
we're going to build new space.
Right.
So that's typically what we're asking for and what we're about, what we're doing. So let's talk about the goal of a capital campaign. What are we looking for when we start the campaign? The first thing we're looking to do is raise money.
Well, and that's it precisely. We're looking to raise a substantial amount of money, and the parameters around that for me are number one, whatever is raised really reflects the additional giving capability of the congregation. You would think that certainly larger churches could raise more money than smaller churches, and that's true. There are more giving units available. But the other constraint there is how many larger donors do you have in your congregation? There could be situations where smaller churches with very large capacity donors could raise as much or more than a larger church who had net more members to give. So each campaign for each church is kind of a unique item, if you will, because it's dependent on what's available to raise. But you want to raise those dollars, you want to raise those commitment pledges, and you want to do it in a way. Here's two qualifiers for me. You want to do it in a way that after the campaign, the church is still healthy, assuming it was before you started, and the church is happy not only with the dollars raised, but with the process used to raise those dollars. I was in one congregation and we were nearing the end of it, and a church member came up to me and said, I want you to know I've been through two of these campaigns in other churches, and this is the best one, the best spirited, the most reasonable. He says, this has felt really good as an experience for us as a congregation. So that's my goal. Raise your capacity and make sure the church can maintain its health and be happy after the experience is done with.
Okay. And there is a spiritual dimension to this. We're praying over what God would have us to do. We're responding to what we think God has done for us already. So it's not just the crassness of give us your money. As a community of faith, we have come to a point where we need to do something significant, and in order to do that significant thing, we need our members to participate with us. There are also tools to help us. Number one, a consultant is certainly a tool that's needed to help us figure all this out. There's also a thing called a giving pyramid that can help us look at how gifts should be dispersed if we're going to raise the amount of money that we're looking to raise. And so that lets us know who to ask and how to ask for the right gift in the right place at the right time. More to say about that in a little bit. But there is the spiritual dimension of what we're doing. There's the congregational dimension of what we're doing. And then there's the data driven aspect of what we're about. So we are not just deciding in a business meeting we're going to raise money and start asking people for money. There are intentional components of each of these that we should be talking about. So, another question that comes to mind as we talk about the goal, how do members determine what they should give?
That's a great question. Um, Members are invited to consider what their additional giving might be. I would say it's almost like the invitation at the end of a typical Baptist worship service. You know, inviting you to respond to the word, respond to the music, respond to the spirit. So, my background is Baptist, and I think that's a healthy way to make a decision. I ask congregations to pray as individuals or in family units, or if people live singly, to maybe as a trusted prayer partner they already have, and to pray asking God to give them an amount to give, to place on their mind and hearts what amount is my part to participate in this campaign.
And
Secondly, that
go
they
ahead.
discuss that prayer process. Let's talk about this. If you're hearing this amount and somebody else in the household's hearing another amount, y'all probably need to talk about that. At least do this. Don't let that be a point of controversy within the relationships in the family, but
Absolutely.
have honest, open conversations about what our part is. And if that's our number, how are we going to give that? I find few families have a lot of margin in their family budget. So if they're going to give additionally to the church, they're going to have to find that money probably in their living. It's probably in their lifestyle choices. It's probably somewhere they're already spending money on. And I don't try to denigrate anybody's living expenses. I just simply say, where is the priority point for you and your family with this gift to the church? Among all the good ways that you spend your money, what is it that you can delay or put on hold or maybe increase in terms of income that can make this gift meaningful and significant for you? Now, in previous campaigns through the years, this is what we call sacrifice, is
Yeah.
letting one thing take a back step in order for something of higher value take a front step. And I call it prioritization because we do that every single day of our life. We make priority decisions. Make this one of those types of decisions. Third, uh, identify how you're going to do it. I don't like approaches to campaigns that said, just trust God to give you a number, and if God gives you that number, trust God to show you later how to give it. Well, what that typically winds up being is a campaign that raises $1 million and you only receive 700,000 of it.
Yes. We are asking God to give us a number, and we are trusting God to help us in that. But we also have to say to God what we're willing to do,
We do. We have
right?
to make that final decision.
Yeah.
This is
And
not, I'm
and
going to give as I'm led. No, that's
no,
not how you pay your mortgage. That's not how you pay your car loan. That's not how you pay your utilities. You don't pay those as you are led.
right, right. I'm led every month to pay those. So
So,
for instance, if the church can expect to raise 1 to 3 times its annual budget over 3 years. We
right.
we know the data is there to support this kind of uh, campaign goal. So should I look to my own budget and say, well, I'm giving $1,000 to the church now. Should I pledge $3,000 over the next 3 years in addition to my ongoing tithe? Is that a good rule of thumb, or are there other ways to figure out what my giving should look like?
Yes, that's a great question. Here, math seems like an easy approach to take, but it doesn't help us very much because there are some large gifts that some people have, either as individuals or as families, that are not reflected in their annual giving to the church.
Mm-hmm.
What I find is once a family or household gives about $500 a month to the church, 6,000 a year, and they have additional giving capacity and desire to be generous, they typically won't give that extra money to the church, or if they do, it's a designated type of gift or a one-off gift.
Right.
What they typically do is look for other nonprofits that they agree with the values and missions, and they start channeling their generosity there.
Yes.
Because there's a concern among large capacity donors that they don't want the church heavily dependent on their giving. They are there to respond if there's a need, but they're not wanting to become 8% of the church's annual gifts, for example. Now, you won't do that at 6,000 a year, I know that. But uh, what I really would like people to do is be honest with their own capacity as they're listening to God. And if they listen to God through a real earnest prayer effort, God will reflect back to them what they should give. Now, another tool that helps that happen is this pyramid of gifts. So if
Yes.
you're trying to raise $1 million, you're going to need one gift at a minimum of $100,000, either outright or over 3 years. Better if it's $150,000. And then you will need two gifts between $50,000 and $75,000. Now, back to your example, let's say a person's got capacity for either of those two levels, and they've been giving $1,000 a year to the church, and they say, "Well, we're going to raise three times. I'll just triple my gift and make that $3,000 pledge." And they had capacity for $50,000 to $150,000. That's where math doesn't help us.
Yes.
I don't like
So
average giving
so
because it lowers the expectation of high capacity givers.
exactly. And that is the importance of asking personally for gifts, not just saying, well, if everybody will give an extra $3,000, we'll have this made, or if everybody will give three times what they're giving, we'll make this pledge. No, some of the people who have that capacity for larger sacrificial gifts, we have to go to and ask them to pray specifically around what we're asking for.
Yeah.
And so there is a sacrificial component to this, there is a spiritual component to this, and then there is the data. We know there are that math is going to work for us, but math alone will not work for us.
Right.
So, trying to find ways to help people figure out how they can manage this. For instance, if you give up one Starbucks a day over 3 years, you'll end up giving almost $3,000.
It is amazing. And I've
Yep.
worked with churches where the youth group did that. They gave up a Starbucks a week uh, as a group, and they raised a tremendous amount of money. It was
Yes.
amazing.
So, sacrifice is a part of this, and we're not asking you to to sacrifice everything you're doing, but look at your lifestyle and see where there might be some excess and how you can be generous in that excess. Uh, we're always coming back to generosity, and we're always coming back to abundance. And
Yes.
so, math tells us we can expect to raise 1 to 3 times the annual budget over 3 years. Math also tells us we will receive between 90% or more of what people
Yes.
pledge to give. And how does that happen?
Well, if a church hasn't been through a campaign in a while, and means that people haven't really been asked to contribute over and above their regular giving so that ministry funding stays strong, then they will make a good faith commitment. They've listened to God, they found a way to reorder their family spending but they're still going to make sure beyond a doubt they can fulfill that commitment pledge, which means that later, as it becomes easier to do that on a monthly basis during 3 years and other opportunities arise, they start to increase what they could give. And this is for those people who are really highly committed to the project. They understand its significance, strategic significance in the ministry life of the church. So I've had congregations that have given over 100% of the commitment amount, mainly because they wanted to be sure on the front end that they could give those commitments.
Yes. And we know uh, we can't look out 3 years and see what's going to happen. We can, in faith, say, Lord, this is what I'm willing to do. And if other blessings come my way, if more abundance comes into my home, I'll share that as well.
Yes.
So we're not asking people for the least they can give. We're not asking them for the most they can give. We're asking them to make a pledge or a covenant that if this happens, I'll do this. And then we're able to build that budget and begin to look and see what we might be able to do. So you have outlined for us 10 steps in the process. So I want us to dig a little deeper into this process and see what that begins to look like. So the first thing you suggest is that we clarify the project. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, when you need to understand that money follows mission. Nothing happens with legitimacy in church life unless there's a look to or an understanding of congregational mission. So the thing I say is let's be sure we've got a consensus around identity, values, and strategic direction, which is how I identify mission. Some churches use vision. Well, that's fine. Vision is just a visual description of carrying out your mission. This is one and two and together. So everything that you do then in terms of ministry flows out of that mission. And that's the second thing for me. Know what your strategic ministries are. And they are invariably related to your community. You have certain opportunities in your community that other congregations won't have in their communities. And you have certain gifts within your congregation that other congregations don't have. I had one client, and one of their ministries was Sunday school class for special ed students, because in that congregation, they had 4 active and retired special ed teachers who knew how to do special education with folks who were challenged in that respect. So they created a Sunday school class. Now, their immediate community didn't have a unique opportunity, but the larger community did. And once they realized there's a class there for my child, they were more than willing to drive whatever distance to bring their child to church and have that experience with that particular congregation. Invariably, carrying out ministry requires space.
Yes.
Space is simply the platform upon which we do ministry, whether it's worship or education, fellowship, even parking is required space for ministry. So you have to have those 4 all in balance: worship, education, fellowship, and parking space. And that's when you get to the point of identifying where's our choke point in terms of growing. Do we have enough space in those 4 areas? Or do we have enough usable space? We've got the square footage, but it's old and it's worn out and it's run down and it leaks and the lights won't turn on when we want them to turn on. So you build your project around the ministries that your mission dictates you carry out. That's how
Yes.
we get to project.
And don't forget bathrooms, and don't forget don't forget not just the facility itself, but also the gathering space within the bathroom or
Yes.
outside of the bathroom. How hospitable are you to one another and to people who come into your space? All of that is important, and we often overlook those those places because we just take them for granted.
Yeah.
So let me back up just a second. The congregation has voted we're going to do a capital campaign,
Right.
and then we begin working on clarifying the project, developing these ministries, and identifying the needs. Unless it's debt retirement, and then we've decided we're going to retire some debt, and we're probably going to give a tithe of what we receive to something else. Uh, More and more churches are not just taking money for themselves; they're tithing the receipts of that money. But somebody has to clarify the project. Who is the person or persons that are clarifying and doing this work that we're outlining?
Most congregations, through a building planning committee of some type,
Okay.
will employ an engineer if it's just renovation work, or they will employ an architect if it's new space and redesign work.
Mhm.
And they will pay those professionals money to do something they're not skilled in doing.
Yes.
And the engineer and or architect will show up and ask a ton of questions, just a lot of questions, to make sure they understand what the real space needs are and
Yeah.
how flexible they need that space to be. And
Now,
that's where you get to the point of creating the scope of the project. It may have to be phased, and creating cost estimates for the project. But
yes.
you're not at the point yet where you want to go authorize building drawings and bid documents and blueprints.
Yep.
Those are very expensive. And you've
And
got to be sure you know you can afford this project before you spend those dollars.
exactly. And I've been working with a church the last few months, and they had their capital campaign all laid out. They're raising good money, but suddenly they're starting to do projects, and they're over budget on every project.
Yeah.
Their bid process was good, and I think was pretty much on target, but it was done 3 years ago. And now, 3 years later, when they start spending some of that money they've raised, everything is over budget because of the economy and where we find ourselves. So
Yes.
you have to anticipate that as well. So uh, we are at the point we've done the strategic work, we've identified what we want to do. Now we're going to hire an architect and begin to get some initial costs for what we want to do. That may mean we have to come back after that conversation and cut some of what we're doing, or maybe we'll say we're going to go on faith anyway. We're going to move out. God has said this is what we need to do, so this is where we're going to go. Does the church vote on each of these areas, or do we authorize our committee structure to put this work in place and keep the church apprised of what we're doing?
That gets down to congregational polity. Now, coming from a Baptist background, I think the more you involve the congregation in general approval of the direction that's being laid out, the better off you are.
Okay.
It's a way to inform more people. But there are some congregations without that polity. They have church councils, or they invest a lot of authority and responsibility in dedicated committees like building committees, and they trust that that's the process and they follow it.
Right.
Uh, so I have a strong bias to what the culture says.
Okay.
How is it best done in your culture? Uh, the thing I will say is once you've got that architect, they can give you cost estimates. They should give you a conceptual plan. In other words, a visual rendering if the project lends itself to that. But you do not want to pay for those blueprints yet. You want to put together your financial plan that supports the conceptual plan.
Okay.
So you begin that financial plan after the project has been scoped and costed.
Okay.
And that includes, first of all, I say go to a local bank. No, I don't believe in long term borrowing, but you will need short term borrowing. And if you're going to have a capital campaign later, all that money doesn't show up the first week. It takes 3 years for you to get all the pledge money in. So you'll need some short term lending and talk to your local banks. Most of them today will ask, have you had your capital campaign yet? That's what they expect in order to
Yeah.
lend money. But you need to find what are the terms that are available. Then you start to consider a capital campaign where you go raise these extra dollars designated precisely for the project that has been decided upon.
So we're not doing fundraising until we're way down the project board.
Exactly.
We're at point number 7 or 8 right now, and now we're beginning to raise money.
That's right.
We also, at least I would suggest, that we win some little victories on the front end. So we're not waiting for 3 years before we begin any of the work. But even as we begin some projects immediately, we still are going to need a short term loan. We still are going to need some immediate gifts to help us fund what we're doing and the work that needs to happen. Because
Right.
while this is happening over here, there's some things that are happening here, like getting those final drawings, like getting conceptual models, like finding contractors who are going to help us. So
Yes.
we're now conducting fundraising, and this is at step number 7 or 8 in the process. So
Right.
there's a lot of work that's had to have happened for a capital campaign before the fundraising aspect of that campaign begins.
And let me say why that is. Because in a capital campaign, if you don't do those things early in sequence, then during the campaign, people will raise the question about every one of those items we've already listed.
Yes.
And those questions will call into question how
Yes.
competently we're managing this campaign, how ready we are for a campaign. You want to go through the whole process to have those questions laid out. Now, as you start a campaign, will everybody remember that question's been answered? No. Oh gosh, no.
Right.
You know, we get their attention for 1 hour a week and then they're somewhere else the rest of the time.
Yes.
So the campaign will always say, if you will remember on this date, we had this discussion and here are the relevant facts that led us to decide this and move forward. So these steps 1 through 6 are basically developing your rationale. Some
Yes.
fundraisers call it the case. I call it the big why. Why
Okay.
are we doing this? And let's get
Absolutely.
those questions out of the way so we know that when we raise money, if we get what we need, we're ready to go ahead and do this project.
And whoever is guiding this process is constantly communicating to the congregation.
Absolutely.
Now I say don't vote on anything unless you have to. However, uh, I also say communicate, communicate, communicate. And after we've begun our fundraising, which is not a one day everybody bring your gifts to the storehouse. This is over a period of time. We're doing fundraising. While that's going on, we are also clarifying our cash flow, looking at how much money do we have on hand right now.
Yep.
what's the costs that we are looking at, and what kind of loan do we need to secure, and who will loan us the money at an affordable rate over an affordable time. So there is work that is going on. It's not just asking for money one day and then everything is magically ready to work. This is a long-term process, and as we begin the capital campaign, there's a lot of work that's being done step by step by step along the way,
Right.
with a lot of people helping us along the way as well. So we got a good chunk of money. We've clarified where we are. We've gotten bids. We have the blueprints. We're approving the construction. We still are raising money while we're approving the construction. And then we're building, we're dedicating, we're celebrating. Uh, but are we still raising money down at this last part of the process?
Well, here's how this campaign is structured. There are 4 Sundays where the campaign is extremely visible to the congregation. Those 4 Sundays are included within 3 months that includes preparation and communication. And those 3 months launch 3 years of congregational giving. There are people who will make a pledge early in the process, but they are waiting on something else to happen in their financial life, to sell an asset, to receive an inheritance because they've been notified by the attorneys for the deceased already that they're in that estate plan. So there are always some surprises that can come during the 3 year giving period. Now, why 3 years? Because we've thrown that out as if that's a natural assumption that that's how we're going to do this.
Right.
There are people who cannot give you $10,000, but they can give you $200 a week. And if you do $200 a week for what, 50 weeks? That's kind of close to 10,000, and that's just the first year.
Yeah.
And then you've got 2 more years coming. So having an extended pledge period beyond the initial campaign maximizes giving from people who don't have the larger gifts readily available. And also during that 3 years, anything can happen. Now, I recommend churches, when they use a commitment card or estimate of giving card, that they put a little disclaimer at the bottom. This statement of intention to give to our campaign may be revised or canceled should circumstances make it necessary. So you're not signing up for a loan or for a bill paying process. You're doing the best you know how with God's leadership to say, this is my intention over the next 3 years. I may decide to give it at one time or 3 times or over 3 years, weekly or monthly. But here's the thing about it. Circumstances do not always change for the worse. Circumstances most often change for the better. And as they do, people have the opportunity to revise their commitment upward.
And we are not just talking about the fundraising to the capital campaign over 4 Sundays and then never talking about it again.
No, it's nice to have 1 year anniversaries, 2 year anniversaries. We're
Yes.
coming at the end of our 3 year. Let's all get current and finish with bang.
Again, communicate, 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 and keep people engaged in the process. I refer to this as a covenant. So I am saying to God and to my church that this is what I intend to do in relationship with you. In the covenant relationship, there are things God promises us.
Right.
in the covenant relationship, there are things the congregation promises us. And so it is this triangle, if you will, of of me and my family in relationship to God, in relationship to the congregation. All things being equal, this is what I'm going to do. If I harvest more than I thought I was going to harvest, I have the opportunity to give more. If my field lies fallow, I may not be able to give anything this next year. But on the front end, in covenant, I'm promising to do these things. And then as we keep the congregation more and more aware of what we're doing, I have the opportunity to revise, if I choose, my pledge, or just give more gifts without talking about the pledge or the covenant that we've been in process with. So let's talk for a minute about what are the basic requirements of a capital campaign.
Capital campaign is just like a stool. It rests on three legs. So, number one, you need a rationale, a case, or a big why.
Okay.
You've got to have that worked out. That's why it's in those early steps in the process. Number two, you need leaders. And I sometimes talk with church clergy and committee members, and they say, we would love to see our young adults involved. Can we recruit young adults? And I said, it depends on their experience level, because capital campaigns are a platform for experienced leaders. It's not a training ground for brand new leaders who've never done anything like this before, especially on the steering committee, the large committee that needs to mobilize other people to work with them to do all the things involved in the campaign. However, you will discover leadership gifts and talents in the campaign that you can then deploy later in church ministry opportunities. So, a case, big why, leaders who are proven and trusted. I remember in one church, someone said to me, it was a member, says, I'm not really for that campaign, but Buddy there, he's in charge of it. And if he is, there can't be anything wrong with it. I trust Buddy. Didn't trust the campaign, but Buddy was the guy, you know.
Exactly.
So that's the kind of leaders you need, who can use their own influence to bring people along with them. And the third thing you need is a plan. How are you going to get this done? Are you going to start off with big meetings? You're going to start off with individual visits? You're going to go just to the top 20 big givers in the church? Leave everybody else out for a while? What's your plan? And there are plans available via Google. Google, Church Fundraising Capital Campaign Plan. And you can buy a plan, probably less than $50. But unless you understand why that plan is put together the way it is, you could have more plan and not a whole lot of information, if you know what I mean.
Exactly.
So most churches will consider using an experienced guide, consultant. Once you say consultant, people say, nah, we don't want to pay for a consultant.
Exactly.
Says, well, what do you consider about inviting an experienced guide to come along with you? And then you compensate that person relative to what they get done for you. And so sometimes people find that's a pretty reasonable approach. Says, let's at least talk to some people and decide how we want to go about this.
Yeah.
For me, I've been a consultant, fundraising consultant. I don't back away from that identity one bit, and I've done it for nearly 4 decades. And people have raised more money with me than they would have without me.
Yes.
Does that mean they wouldn't have raised money at all? No, they would have raised money. But you want to maximize giving capacity and at the same time leave the church healthy and happy with the experience. And that's my focus as a consultant.
And thank you for being transparent about that. Full disclosure, you are a fundraising consultant, and you've done this as your livelihood for years. Uh, but one thing you didn't mention that I would mention, because I've been through several fundraising opportunities, not only in my time at CBF, also at my time in local church. The work of the church is still going on. The pastor and staff are still caring for members, still planning worship, still delivering sermons. The finance committee is continuing to meet and manage the finances of the church. The building committee is still taking care of those leaky faucets and linoleum floors that need to be polished. The work of the church is still ongoing. Then we overlay a capital campaign on the top of that. It just makes good sense that we would hire a wise guide to lead us in that process, uh, so that all the work of that campaign doesn't fall upon pastor and staff who are already stretched to the limit, or even bringing Buddy in, your guy that you mentioned a minute ago. Buddy's also got a life going on, and he may or may not have any idea how to work this process. I've done a few campaigns where good old boys were on the steering committee, and they gave up about halfway through because it was more work than they wanted to do. So let's let's talk for just a minute. Do we really need a consultant?
You want to maximize giving capacity without harming your congregation. First, do no harm. And I can tell you that some congregations, even with a consultant, wind up in harmful situations for their church members. Fortunately, those are few and don't happen often at all. But the thing that a consultant is trying to do is, number one, respect the fact that all the clergy do have full-time jobs, more than full-time jobs. And generally, a consultant will say, number one, let's schedule your campaign when you're not trying to do any other extra big thing. So most campaigns try to avoid interfering with church members' time, attention, energy, and talents. We need a clear landing path for the campaign as far as the church calendar goes. Uh, One thing that I do is, well, it's two things really, but the thing you don't notice until after the campaign is over. But the first thing I do is I normalize a campaign giving experience. I talk about it as a part of the Christian life. It's what we as disciples do. We take on challenges that extend ministry. There are times when that requires funding, and if it's more money than we have on hand, then we do things necessary to get additional money. But I just put it in plain English. I don't talk fundraising language. Sometimes I don't even talk spiritual language because I want to be sure people understand, bottom line, what we're trying to do here. So I normalize it. I make it seem as a part of what we have always been about as the church. The second thing I do, and you generally don't notice this till after the campaign, is I maintain kind of a quiet, calm presence throughout. You will never find me in any campaign scenario running around as if my hair's on fire. I'm not going to bark at people if they're behind on getting their work done. I'm going to jump in there with you and we're going to do it together. And so, what you're doing is you're asking somebody to come along into church life and walk this campaign path with you, showing you where the ruts are on either side of the road, keeping you out of those ditches, clarifying what it means to make a sacrificial, meaningful, significant gift, and helping people answer those questions all along the way. I think the most fearful thing that I encounter among people, clergy and lay leaders, is how are they going to be treated in terms of a campaign? Who's going to come talk to me about my gift? How are they going to talk to me? I don't want any high pressure salesperson. I don't want an order taker just looking for the next transaction. You want somebody that has, I think, a pastoral approach that understands church life, how we try to live in covenant together, and is going to do everything they can to get you the results you want within that covenantal understanding of life together. So I would recommend, I led a campaign last year. The person who wound up being our steering committee chair did not want to hire a consultant. We don't need them. We can do this ourselves. They could have done a good job themselves. They're capable, they were motivated. The project had a high urgency rating. So I said, well, I understand that. And the pastor says, after I realized that was in my congregation, he says, I went to the 4 retired pastors who have joined our church since I've been here. And I asked them individually, how do I go about having a capital campaign? He said, every one of them said, you hire a consultant. You find the best consultant with references you can check. You don't hire somebody unknown. You hire somebody that's known by somebody you know, or who's recommended by somebody you know. And at the end of the day, I said to the pastor, I says, why don't we do this? Do you know for sure you can raise the amount of money you need? They said, not really. I says, well, why don't I just carve up this campaign guide proposal and I'll just do this piece and I'll do an assessment and that way you'll know. And then if you want to go do it yourself, you can do it yourself. And so I did that. They had good results. It gave them some confidence about moving forward. And then the pastor says, now what's next? I says, well, what's next is you do it yourself. And he says, well, what do I need? I says, you need some campaign materials. I says, I can carve this relationship up another little bit and I can do all the materials for you with timelines and resources and strategies. And that'll just take a bit of the bottom line is I carved it up into bite-sized pieces where they got the full deal. They just got it in increments and
Yes.
they were delighted with the results. I was delighted. They gave more than I thought they could.
The bottom line of this discussion is a consultant, a knowledgeable consultant with a track record. And I appreciate you saying check references. You're hiring somebody to help you do work. You
Yeah,
absolutely are going to check references. The same way you're going to check references on a construction manager, the same way you're going to check references on who does a bank loan, the same way you check references on who you hire on your pastoral staff. You are hiring someone to work with your church. You absolutely check them out and see their track record. Ask other churches, were they easy to work with? Was there a spiritual dimension to this? You want to know those background
that's
questions
right.
without apology. And if the consultant is worth working with, they understand checking references is part of the deal. Uh, also, you are hiring a guide, someone who has already been there and done that enough to know where the potholes are, enough to know this chair of the committee is kind of burly and prickly and he doesn't want me here. So I know how to work with people who have conflict with me. The consultant understands how that needs to happen. And the last part is we need somebody to hold us accountable. When it is pastor and committee doing the work, uh, somebody's got to hold that group accountable, or they've really got to be committed to holding each other accountable. And it's always easier for an outside person to come in and not to be heavy handed, but as you said, to be a pastor to the group
Right.
and lead them. Uh, that's so important, especially these days. I think it's so important. And the bottom line is we will do more with a consultant than we will do without a consultant. That's just the bottom line. And math works at that point. Secondly, what does success look like for a capital campaign?
Well, there are several indicators for me. The most visible is the math. How much did we raise in additional giving and commitments to give that we can expect to have over the next 3 years? And how does that relate to our normal regular giving? Was it 1 times our income, or 2 or 3 or more times our income? The project makes a big difference. People are less excited about paying off debt than they are about building something new.
Yep.
And that's true of us as in every aspect of life. We really don't like the car payment in the mailbox, reminding us we got to pay for what we owe. But
Yep.
we sure did enjoy putting that down payment down on that new car, you know, and driving it off the lot. That was a lot of fun. Here are some non-financial results that I look for and I listen for. Number one is the congregation closer together relationally.
Mm-hmm.
We ask the congregation to take this on. We invite them into a journey of capital giving that includes this covenant relationship with one another and with God. Are they indeed closer together? Was this a renewal experience for them? Number two, did new personalities emerge who are part of a new leadership core? Do we now know when we do our nominating process or our recruitment process every year, do we now know who is really good at what they were able to do in the capital campaign, and we have a need for that elsewhere in church life? Have we identified new leaders, and are they willing to join up in a more significant way? The third thing is there a deeper understanding of stewardship and generosity having gone through this process? Do we realize that the life that is truly life does not consist in an abundance of things, but an abundance of relationships and ministry impact? And have we been able to, at least for this time in our Christian walk, make that shift in our focus about living a good life? So that's what I'm looking for out of a campaign experience. I don't know of any other process that a church can go through together that has as many benefits like that as a capital campaign.
Yep.
And then you look forward 3 years, what happens in that fourth year? Many people decide to continue their campaign giving because their finances have grown into it,
Mm-hmm.
and that becomes additional money for the ministry budget. So it's kind of like on the back end, what we've been doing is developing significant annual gifts, if not tithing, through this additional giving through the capital campaign.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Growing people, growing givers, growing their hearts, growing their minds. Church members who aren't on the steering committee, what's their role? Just the regular church member who's in the pew 2 Sundays a month, what's their role?
I would ask them to be present, to be attentive, to say yes when they're asked to do a small part of a much larger enterprise, and to pray regularly for the success and the excitement of what is possible when everybody works together towards the same goal. And I don't diminish that by saying just because you're not on the steering committee, this is all you can do. This is significant stuff you can do. Be present. Listen to
Oh,
all the sermons.
do we
Go
go
to
to
the
a
small
church
group
member?
meetings.
I'm sorry. Do we go to a church member and say, Ruben, we're doing this project and we really think you ought to be giving about $50,000 to this process? Is
You can go to a church member and do that if you want to shoot yourself in the foot. Uh, you know, uh, I would do it more artfully than that. And
okay.
I'll just be transparent again about my process. There are going to be 10 to 12 families that give you a third of the total amount that's raised.
Wow. Okay.
10 to 12, sometimes 8 to 10. A
Okay.
third of what you raise come from those families.
All
They
right.
have the capacity. I think they get a visit. And the visit is simply to say, will you pray? Will you seek God's leadership and giving to this campaign? And you hand them a tool called a gift guide or a gift chart. You refer to it as a pyramid of gifts.
Right.
And it shows that in order to raise this $1 million, we don't have average gifts, we have proportionate gifts, gifts in proportion to what people can give. And here are the top two levels and a third level. And we would just ask you to consider where God would have you participate in terms of the resources He's allowing you to manage on God's behalf.
Okay.
And
So
that's the prayer, and
we
that's the invitation.
we
It
know.
doesn't specify an amount of money, but it does say if you have capacity, this
Yeah.
is where you need to be praying.
So we know some of the amounts that we need because of math. The
Yes,
data tells us we need these amounts, but
yes,
each church member decides how they're going to be engaging in that
absolutely.
process. Right. So
See,
finally,
God loves a cheerful giver,
yes,
someone who comes to giving voluntarily with a heart that is glad for the opportunity.
right. God also loves an uncheerful giver.
They do, but cheerful givers are the ones we want.
Exactly. So are there some things to avoid?
Uh, do not assume you know what a person's giving capacity is or is not. And I'll give you two examples.
Okay.
In one congregation I worked with, the person who earned the most annual income was the president of a local manufacturing company. And because it was a stock ownership company, his income was public record. Everybody knew.
Mhm.
If they wanted to, they could find out.
Yep.
So he was asked to give near the top. What people did not know, because he kept this private, he had two aunts who were spinsters who never married, had no children, and no one in their generation left alive to care for them. He was the nephew that had the capacity to give. And so he was paying for, on a regular basis, two nursing home residents full time.
Wow.
He also had a child in an Ivy League college. Now he had income, but he had high expense.
Right.
And that diminished what he could give, but he gave generously beyond his familial obligations. In another congregation, there was a widow. She drove a 10-year-old Honda Accord. She gave a nice sum every year to the church, but her giving capacity far outstripped anybody else's in the congregations. I had the opportunity to have a conversation with her. She says, my job is to manage God's money for God's purposes. And she was loaded. And
Wow.
she was very generous through their capital campaign
Hmm.
for their building projects.
Yep.
So do not overestimate, do not underestimate.
Yes.
Just take each person as they present themselves and say, this is the challenge we all are facing. Now, one thing, more than any other thing that really gets people's attention, is if the person making the visit, generally I ask the pastor to do that for these higher level givers. for the person making the visit to share what he or her and their family are going to give to the campaign.
Okay.
The pastor is always, in my experience, in the top 20 givers in the congregation because they tithe. And there are some others who are also tithing with them that make their way into that upper level. But if a pastor is able to come to a conclusion about their gift and it's obviously sacrificial and they share that in a one-on-one relationship, that makes a big difference.
Yes, absolutely. Um, we got just a minute or two left. Uh, we could talk for hours about this. I know you could talk for hours and tell us story after story. I want to thank you for joining me today. As always, just a wealth of knowledge that you bring to this role. We are calling people to be generous and share out of their abundance. That's the bottom line for all of
Yeah.
this. And then asking for the right amount, asking the right person for the right amount in the right way at the right time. The basics of fundraising certainly play into this, and we've talked about that in several other videos as well. So, what do we do next? Well, perhaps you want a presentation handout. If you do, send me an email, bo.prosser@gmail.com, or through the center, www.c4ce.org. Uh, and I will be happy to get you a copy of the PowerPoint. You can use that with any of your committees, any of your church leaders, whatever you might do. Also, contact Ruben if you want to have more conversation with him. Ruben Swint at gmail.com. Ruben is, you've seen his heart in this video and in other videos. You've also seen his knowledgeable base. So, Ruben is certainly someone who would be a wise guide for your church in all this. Ruben, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. I love working with you, and I know some of the churches that have talked with you and have given me good feedback, and very appreciative for what you bring to the conversation. So thanks again for joining me today.
My pleasure, Bo. Thanks to you and thanks to everyone that listens.
Thanks again, Ruben. Send me an email for the handout. Contact Ruben if you want to talk further. Additional resources on our YouTube channel, also www.c4ce.org. Bo Prosser, the Center for Christian Education. Bo and the Beard. Hey, everybody, till we see you again, keep on rocking out there.